Hi there and welcome to the second video here of the day from Festival of Work. I'm Andy.
I'm Alice.
And we are joined today by a very special guest. We've got Jonathan Males. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, good to be here.
It's good to have you here. We're really excited to talk to you. We've been looking at your bio, we've been looking at your career. It's fascinating. And I don't think I'm going to do it too much justice introducing you anyway, but you've grown up in Tasmania, you've competed in World Canoeing Championships, you've coached performance coaching, performance psychologist for Olympic, Paralympic Games, and now you're coaching business performance. You've released a book, The Work Revolution, an amazing career. Could you tell us a bit about it from your perspective, how you've got here today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I always go back to Tasmania, that's where I grew up, and I guess it's funny, looking back at Tasmania now, it was a place where, as a kid, unless you were good at sport, nothing really much mattered.
Right.
And I feel I had two big handicaps when I was young. I was smart, which didn't get me any brownie points at all, and I was terrible at football.
Oh no.
So I needed to find a sport like canoeing where I could sit down, and I was good at that, and so I pursued that to a high level. So through the 80s I made it onto the Australian team and competed internationally, and that was a really amazing time. If I think back to that decade now, it was such a cool time. And it was also really difficult because a lot of the time I didn't know what I was doing. The whole field of performance psychology was pretty new.
Yep.
But I got really fascinated because I realised that one of the things that was holding me back from my own performance was just my ability to manage myself and feeling too nervous and going in with wrong expectations into events. So for me, coming out of the 80s, I came out of that with a real passion to work out what is it that goes on in here and how does that impact performance, both in sport but also beyond that. So
whilst you're involved with sport, were you consciously thinking about your mindset, or was it only when you started studying the sports psychology?
I became interested in it while I was doing it as a competitor because I was struggling, because I was unable, and at the time there wasn't much around. Back in the 80s it was a pretty early field.
Okay, interesting. So after the canoeing then, what was the transition then? So you mentioned that you kind of went into that sports psychology. What was the transition period?
The transition was really, I guess, late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and I coached, so I became a canoeing coach.
Yeah.
I worked with the Australian team at the Barcelona Olympics as a coach.
Cool. Yep.
But my approach as a technical slalom coach was always very psychological because I really didn't see the difference between the two.
Right.
The idea that psychology was here and technical performance is somewhere else, they're so interlinked. So my coaching was always informed.
Okay.
So I coached the Australian team in 92, came here to Britain in 93.
Yep.
Well, at the end of 92, and started working with the British team in 93.
A bit of a globetrotter then as well.
Yeah, well, I changed countries halfway, you see, so that's the big change.
Right.
And then obviously with a career in sports psychology, performance coaching in that respect, how did the transition happen into more of maybe a business or a business performance kind of assessment go? How did you switch into that kind of role?
I was very fortunate because I was able to work through the 90s with two of the real pioneers in the field. So John Sire and Christopher Connolly were pretty much the first sports psychologists to make the transition into business. Yeah. So they'd worked with Tottenham back in the day. They had and they were pioneers in terms of bringing some great ideas about sports psychology into business. So I was very fortunate to work with them and learn the trade alongside them through the 90s.
So it's quite interesting, isn't it, as well? Because obviously, athletes, high performance individuals, and sports performance can often be seen very different to like business performance. But obviously, it's all about that individual drive, right? That individual performance. So, where do you think the main overlaps come in that helps you kind of transfer those skills into that world?
There's a couple of things. I think, first of all, in terms of self-management. So, as a sports performer, whether an individual or a team, you need to be able to manage yourself. Manage your own emotions and focus and attention and everything. So there's a very clear overlap there into the world of sport. I think the other thing that sport gives, many people have a great experience in teams through sport. So that's often their grounding in understanding what teamwork's about. But there are differences as well. I mean, it's not a straight one-to-one comparison. And I think that's where there's a lot of adaptation to start to understand the context of business and what matters and the language of business and the pressures on business people, which are different from the people in sport.
And you've released a book, The Work Revolution. So that covers a lot of what you've just been talking about there. Could you give us a quick overview of kind of what you're trying to cover in that book and what it's focusing on?
Sure. My first motivation for the book was to have a resource I could give to people I was working with.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I was getting a bit tired. I'd be working with someone, I'd be coaching someone, and they'd be saying, "Oh, can you tell me more about this? This topic's come up, and it'd be great to know more." And I'd be rummaging around looking for articles and writing things and trying to get resources together. And I thought, right, I want to put everything in one book that's all the useful, practical, pragmatic stuff that I've worked with people with for years and it's been useful for them. I want to put it in one practical, accessible guide.
Right. Was it quite hard to condense? 'Cause I had looked through your book, and you speak about many topics, but most of them, like we do speak kind of a lot about the self, kind of like self-awareness, like say the motivation. But you mentioned teams as well. Was it quite hard to really kind of pick up what is it you really want to be saying in this book? Because there's a lot in there that you've managed to pack in.
Well, I think that's the beauty of writing for me, is that the act of writing forces some real clarity and articulation. So that for me is the big joy of getting something down. A lot of it was bringing together material I'd written before. So some of it was collation, It was bringing together existing stuff, and there's some new chapters I wrote as well.
Yeah. Did you learn anything new from writing a book and publishing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me the big insight came when I was writing and reflecting on it, and it was taking the bigger picture view.
Right.
And the start and the finish of the book is quite different if you've read it.
Yeah.
So I actually found myself being quite critical of the system that we work in, because I was asking myself, well, why is it that good people struggle in organisations? For 30 years I've been working with people. Why is this going on?
Well, I noticed at the start of your book you say a certain phrase which I don't think is suitable to say here, but if you take a look at the book, you'll know exactly what I mean.
Yes,
I think it's true.
I was being a bit Australian in that, channeling my inner Aussie. But the way we work is not great at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, you do talk about being more human at work.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Like, what is it to be more human in a workplace?
It's about, to be more human, I'll go back to the premise of the book, is that the system that we all work in, that we all live in, whether you call it capitalism, neoliberalism, or whatever, the world we live in, creates a way of being which makes us unhuman, which actually takes us away from our fundamental humanity.
It's true, actually, yeah.
And it leads us into a condition where it's very hard for us to be human with ourselves or human with other people. So the first thing is we've got to recognise that.
Yeah.
So whenever any of us are struggling, or see someone else struggling, it's not necessarily because they are wrong or failing, but we all work in this pretty screwy system.
Yeah.
But within that, it comes back to self-awareness.
Right.
So to be human means I've got to stay in contact with my own humanity.
Okay.
As a start, and then remember that the people I'm dealing with are also human, with the same hopes and fears and failings as me.
Okay. And when you speak about remaining human, I think if we were to take that kind of into the workplace, we turn up to a job every day. We want to make an impact. I think that's why we want to be there. Yes, the salary is part of the job, but if we're speaking about kind of a human impact, when you go back to your book, how do you think people can do that? How can they remain and that awareness of being human and then kind of bringing it to their day job?
Sure. The first thing to do is to be really clear about why you're there in the first place.
Right. Okay.
What's the meaning? What's the contribution? What are you doing for others through your job, whether that's others in the organisation or your customers or your clients? So what's in it for someone else or the world?
Right, okay.
And if you can't find that, then you need to have a good think about where you are.
That was going to be my next question. What if the answer is I don't know? Think about it. Yeah. Find somewhere else. Okay.
And again, going back to the system we work in, for many people that's tough because there are many companies and organisations that are there to make money. And the system we're in, that's fine. But it can be pretty hard to find meaning if that's all they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think you also mentioned in your book very much about the way that the companies work now is very much about kind of the short term. It's all about profit. So again, I think it's very transactional, but it's with technology now influencing our day to day. I think you take a really interesting way. You talk about the world revolution and where we're heading to as well. And I think that's something I picked up more towards the end of the book as well. You speak a bit more about kind of the wider picture. So I wondered, have you taken kind of a step back and analysed this world revolution that we're going through with work? And where do you think we're going with this?
Gosh, it's a big question. The world is getting more complex and uncertain. That's one self-evident.
Yeah.
I think the other thing which is not spoken about enough at the moment is that companies are focused on making profit, and they're forgetting that, frankly, climate change and the environmental impact is absolutely huge, and I don't think we can ignore that for much longer. And clearly we're not, but that's important. I think the companies that succeed will be the ones that find a way of creating a meaningful role for people. There'll be the companies that succeed in creating space for people to connect as human beings.
Yeah.
There's been this drive for efficiency over the years. There's been this drive to cut back, and that is so wrong. You know, as human beings, we need a little bit of slack in the system.
Yeah.
We need the capacity to stop and think and reflect. We need the capacity to stop and have a chat to someone and have a cup of coffee. And so whilst companies are on this drive for efficiency, we're forgetting what actually makes us successful as people and as companies. And it's having the capacity to connect as people, to do meaningful work, to have enough focus on what we do, that we can do constructive work and not just be busy all day.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, because I think, you know, we've gone through quite a turmoil the past couple of years, and I feel like now this year we've come out of it and companies are really starting to reflect. Like, a couple of companies are now bringing people back to the office, which I think comes back to your point about where companies have gone from cutting back to, oh gosh, we've really lost the human element, we've lost that engagement with our employees, it's costing us money. So I feel like there's a lot of learning that's going to be happening.
It's a double-edged sword though, isn't it? Because obviously companies try to aggressively expand as well during these opportunities to go, hey, this is how we recover, we'll expand, we'll do this. Well, I think we've talked about a lot this year about people cutting back because we can't do this, this is not sustainable. And then they're going, we can't keep cutting back or losing people because that's not sustainable as well. So it's a war of what's most efficient. Getting rid of people or realising it's too expensive to bring new people on.
Yeah.
Like, you're in this vicious cycle of, we've got to make it more efficient. Well, it's expensive to be efficient.
Yeah. I think people need to start thinking about having enough rather than more.
Yeah.
And enough time, enough profit, enough growth.
Yeah.
Because clearly companies need to grow. I'm not anti-growth.
Yeah.
Because if companies are growing, they're being creative, growth is fine.
Yeah.
But I think when people chase growth at all costs, that's when we get into trouble, both individually, as companies and as whole societies.
And is there an interesting conversation to have there about kind of the investment you make in people then, right? Because if people are going, okay, well, you know, we can't keep bringing on more people. From your point of view, obviously we're talking about performance management. And a lot of companies want to go, we just need to do more with less. It's not about that. Is it actually about going, how can you do more with the people you've got and how can you get more from them and how can you make sure they're more involved with your culture and get more from their belief in the company and then enable them to perform in a great way? Is that an angle we should be looking at?
I'd say rather than doing more, let's think about doing different.
Nice.
Let's
That's
do
a good
different.
statement. Yeah.
Because trying to do more with less, I think we've kind of reached the limits of that.
Yeah.
And I think we need to start about doing different, having a different mindset. And again, for me, it comes back to reframing what success looks like. And it's not, and I suggest it's not about endless growth.
Yeah.
It's about sustainable growth that's enough, that provides enough for the company to be profitable, enough for people to have meaningful jobs, enough for people to enjoy their work. But that doesn't have to be through the roof.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be accelerating, it just has to be. That's a really interesting, actually, because I think it is true that in the world of work, we are just constantly chasing, but it's an interesting point to say, you have enough, how else can you be using that space, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There were two things that you picked up on that I'd like to dig into, if it's okay. It's about focus and that idea of team, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You talked at the start about the idea of actually, you know, one of the connections between maybe sports performance and business is the idea of being part of a team that can support each other and you can enable performance that way. Could you tell us more about that? And how can you optimize performance in a work and a business environment by utilizing that team kind of relationship?
Sure. Look, I think teams are so important because they're the real sweet spot if you want to bring about change in an organisation. If you try and change each individual one by one, that's a long job.
Yeah.
If you try and change the whole organisation at once, that's pretty difficult. But teams are a nice size. You can create change within a team. You can create a different climate, different way of communicating within a team, and people can start to support each other and challenge each other differently. So I think if you think about the team as the unit of change, it's manageable. We can find a way of working with teams. We can find a way of helping each team at a time becoming more connected, more integrated, more supportive. And the image that comes to mind to me, it's like if you imagine the desert and you have a little oasis here and a little oasis there.
Yep.
And the more oases you sort of promote and nurture,
Yep.
the more the greenery spreads. So let's think about those teams as oases in the desert, and let's keep each one joining and growing and joining up with the one next to it. And that's how we'll
Really like
transform.
that.
Yeah. Is there certain qualities that you look for in a team where you think that they would be more adaptable to change?
Yeah, look, the thing that high-performing teams and exceptional teams have, they've got a very clear sense of purpose. They've got good performance habits. This is something from sport, which is really important.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's habits like being accountable. So in a high-performing team, if people do what they say they're going to do, that sounds really simple. But gee,
Okay.
it makes a difference.
Yeah.
A habit like being willing to give feedback.
Okay.
Again, sounds really simple, but it makes a difference. Being willing to learn.
Yeah.
So for me, if you bring team performance down to some really simple habits, if you can start to instill those habits in the right environment, then performance will start to change. But you've got to make
Right.
it simple for people. Again, if you make change too overwhelming, it again goes back to people who are busy. You've got to chunk it down, make it simple. Here's the thing to work on. I talk about the 1% difference. So if I looked at results from Paralympic and Olympic sport, and if you look at who finished fourth in almost any event, and fourth is a terrible place to finish. I know, it's awful.
Let alone second or third.
I know. Fourth is worse because you've got no medal. And then if
True.
you ask the thought experiment, what if that performance was 1% better? And invariably that gets you onto the podium. So the right small change can make a huge difference. And the small change in teams comes from instilling those habits of accountability, of learning, of giving feedback.
Right.
And then one last point, because we were talking about this, and we were joking about it earlier.
We were.
They've been asked quite creative individuals, and we struggle sometimes trying to do too much too often, and then we'll go, I'm going to do this now, and then 2 minutes later I realise I'm doing 3 other things, and I'm like, why am I on this tab? I'm lost. Focus is key.
Yeah.
What advice would you give for someone to optimise their performance by improving their focus? How can you improve your focus to optimise performance?
Really clear. Start the day by working out what's important for you to do that day.
Okay.
So before you look at your emails, before you look at your socials, think for yourself, what are the 1 or 2 key things I need to deliver today? Think about each of them and then work out, okay, how much time do I think this job will take?
Am I allowed to overestimate on that?
No, well,
Okay.
you think, and the key here is to think in 30-minute blocks.
Right. Okay.
So your unit of work is a 30-minute block. So you look at your task and say, well, you know what? I've got to write this report. I reckon that's an hour and a half. Okay, that's 3 30-minute blocks. Then you set yourself the discipline of saying, okay, when's my first 30-minute block going to be? Let's start at 8:30. So at 8:30, you turn off your computer, you turn off your email, you turn off your phone, and for 30 minutes, from 8:30 to 9, all you do is work on that task.
Right.
And when you get to the end of that, you stop. You stop. And then you look at your socials or you get a cup of coffee, and then you say, okay, my next 30-minute block is starting at 10:15. And at 10:15, for the next 30 minutes, all you do is that task, nothing else. And I guarantee if you try this and stick to it, you'll get an amazing amount done.
Watch out for the next 6 months.
I'm promising my manager I'm making notes about this, and I will be implementing it and trying it.
This is, for me,
Yeah.
because I'm as distracted as anyone, and when I do this, I get stuff done. But
think
it's hard because the temptation is, I'll just check, no, your
there
email's
are
off.
so many distractions. Yeah.
You turn the stuff off because you know that you'll turn it back on in 30 minutes.
Okay.
So you're not turning it off all day.
Yeah.
For the next 30 minutes, I'm just doing this. And
Okay.
then I'll look at my emails, or then I'll pick up my phone, or then I'll check messages. But in this 30 minutes, this is all I'm doing.
Right. Thank you very much for that top tip.
I
I will
think-
be putting it into practice.
Yeah, I think that links back
need
nicely
it.
to that simple change that can optimise you. 1% more performance just makes a huge difference. On that note, we are actually running out of time, which is good because I want to keep talking to you about this stuff. But thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank
you for talking about your book. It's fascinating. I want to keep talking to you about it. Hopefully we'll have a bit more time with you today, and I know you're going to do a few more things, a few quick interviews of our team here as well. But I really do appreciate your time, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for anyone that's tuned in to listen, the book is called The World Revolution, and it's by Jonathan Mayles. So you can go and have a look on any. So it's online. Available
It's online, Amazon. Sporamus is the publisher. You can get it direct from Sporamus Press as well. The Work Revolution.
The Work Revolution. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your
Cheers.
time.
And thank you.